Hey everyone, Nathan here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. We're getting deep into the season here. I'm really super excited for how this is shaping up. I want to really call out our producer, Phil Giangrande, for his incredible work. He's an artist, as you see with these episodes day in and day out of what you get with the clips and with the final product. We're really, really pleased to have Phil on our team. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with one of my TCS Education System colleagues, Dr. Matt Nehmer, who's president of the Colleges of Law located in Santa Barbara and Ventura, California. As one of the premier schools in our system, the Colleges of Law has been educating attorneys for several decades, doing really amazing work across the landscape. And the mission and the focus of the college, especially the access focus, is truly inspirational. And it parallels a lot of the unique history and legacy that Saybrook University was steeped in, founded in, some 50-plus years ago as well. And it came in that period of time in higher education where there was a lot of experimentation. Same with K-12, right? So that progressive instinct in education circles kind of waxes and wanes, and that mid-'60s to late '70s time period was that era for trying out different things. And the Colleges of Law and Saybrook University are no different in the sense that they were part of that, part of those mavericks out there that were trying new and different things to create a more educated, a more humane, a more civically engaged society. So I think that is something for us to reflect on, especially as you listen to Dr. Nehmer today. And you might recall in one of our previous episodes, I spoke with his colleague, Dr. Jackie Gardina, who gave an incredible, inspiring interview as well. And she's the dean, and we covered a lot of specifics related to the law. We're going to take a different tack with President Nehmer today, as I'd like very much to get his take on legal education, yes, but also on the state of higher education in general, what it's going to take for colleges of our size, smaller nonprofit private institutions, to remain relevant to our students and our communities. And I'm excited to hear from President Nehmer what lies ahead from his perspective. So, yeah, a little shop talk, but for those of you mulling over the state of higher education and what lies ahead, this one's a great one to listen to. And what's happening in higher education today is going to be and is seismic. Just consider the past 2 years, so many regulatory shifts from the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., to state laws affecting how institutions function in the state of California, to students and their decision-making. Keeping up with all these changes is a full-time job for most college presidents. And for those of us leading small to mid-sized institutions, the requirement to stay on top of these shifts is vital to ensuring a top-notch learning experience for our students. And when people ask me what keeps me up at night, this is probably it. Higher education is at that nexus point, framed by consumer demand, regulatory expectations, and an increasing need for education that meets myriad needs of myriad learners. It's all an exciting moment of change and opportunity, but it's nevertheless something we have to address, and it can be a little scary at times, but sometimes even in the midst of that scariness, there's really exciting optimism that emerges in terms of what can be done. And I think back to all those big shifts in society, those paradigmatic shifts, those that just changed how we thought, how we learned, how we worked as a society, as a people, as communities. And that's where higher ed is today. And higher education in America has been going through this every so often. The criticisms are often the same, but it has never been this wild in terms of what lies ahead. And not only wild, but exciting, right? So there's new frontiers here in what we can do, what we can be, and how we can shape what we offer to our students, to our faculty, to our communities, to help support all of them in achieving their greatest potential. Change is clearly afoot, and I look forward to my time today with Dr. Matt Nehmer to explore these various challenges and opportunities. So let's get to it with President Nehmer from the Colleges of Law. President Matt Nehmer, it is a pleasure, an honor, a privilege to have you here on Saybrook Insights. Before we get started today, I'd love to have you tell us a bit about yourself, your personal history, what brought you to the Colleges of Law and your position as president. So maybe give us the quick bio on Dr. Nehmer.
Well, first of all, just thank you, Saybrook, for putting together this program, and thank you, Nathan, Dr. Long, for having me today. I've been looking forward to this, and looking forward to being a part of what I think is a great podcast series, and just excited to share a little bit about my story and the story of the Colleges of Law. My story began in rural Michigan. I am the son of an auto worker. My father worked at the GM plant in Lansing, so I grew up outside of Lansing, Michigan, in the Midwest, and a very small town, Vermontville, Michigan. It's people could say, I grew up in a small town. Like, how many people? Like 12,000. Like, I got you. It was 740 people.
You got me too, I think.
I got you, maybe. So it was a 1 block long town that no stoplight, just a stop sign, a block, and then another stop sign, and that's Vermontville, Michigan. So it's way off the highway. It's easy to miss, and that's where I'm from. And I remember, growing up in that community, and I remember this. I might have been in fifth grade, and the teacher asked for a show of hands. How many of your fathers, it was fathers more in those days, worked for GM? And I might have been 20 of us in the class, and 18 hands went up. I mean, it was a company town back in the 70s and 80s when GM was king. And then, if you saw the movie Roger and Me, that was I lived through that in the 1980s as GM. What goes up comes back down eventually. So that's where I'm from. And then, my ticket out was education. And I know that's one of the topics that this podcast really gets into, the power and transformative impact of education. And that's where my journey, got me out of Vermontville to Western Michigan University to a journey to higher education from there. And I've been in higher ed. It'll be 24 years next year. And here I am in Santa Barbara, California. Never would have believed that I would be here on this podcast talking to you as the president of the Colleges of Law. But really is education is the path of how I got here.
That's awesome. You grew up in a very small town. We grew up in fairly similar environments. Now, I wasn't in a town of 780-ish, but a GM foundry town in Defiance, Ohio is where I grew up. And it wasn't that education was not valued, but there were expectations for a lot of those growing up in that time to kind of move into the factory life, to kind of do that. What was that experience like for you? Did you have a lot of encouragement to go into college? How was that all kind of processed for you as a kid?
We probably had similar approach. I mean, we found our way to it. My parents didn't go to college. My dad was in the military, so he took correspondence courses through the GI Bill, but didn't have a college experience, nor did my mother. And so I didn't have that, that you see it in the movies, this sort of push to go to college. I think my parents are very pleased that that's the direction I went, and my brother went as well. But it wasn't this omnipresent push for me to go to college. I think for me to find a good job and leave the house was the goal. I didn't have a lot of pressure as a kid growing up. I think my parents, the fact that I went to they're like on house money. He doesn't live in the house anymore, so, and he's not in prison, and so things are pretty good. So yeah, I found my way there.
Yeah. Hey, no, that's all right. If we weren't living in their basement, that was a sign of success, right?
Yeah, and but on the other side, I remember, here's a story of kind of a little bit more of where I'm from. Remember the guidance counselor. You go, down the hall, and there's this guy at a desk, and he'd give you guidance. And it wasn't like, okay, do you want to go to the University of Michigan or Notre Dame or one of the prestigious schools? Here's the path. It was like, we have an opening at the bow factory. If you want to use work release time to work at and I mean like a bow and arrow factory, uh, that's something maybe you might want to do. And then when you graduate high school, maybe they'll hire you on after the fact. So that was the kind of guidance I got from the guidance counselor. It wasn't like how to get into Notre Dame. So you sort of have to find your way in those communities.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and I think that's evolved to some degree, but not much. I mean, we still hear that story reverberating, especially with our first gen students, that have gone through. Well, that's fascinating, and there's a whole culture to it in the Midwest, especially in the factory towns, the car factory towns. So, I really appreciate you sharing that. When you moved to Western Michigan as an undergrad and then into grad school. Once you graduated from there, I think you found yourself eventually at TCS Education System. What was your journey into that, out of curiosity?
My journey, gosh, was 17 years ago this fall. And I was at the time TCS didn't exist. It was the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, and it was, this the one campus there in downtown Chicago. I was working in DC at the time. This was 2005. I was in the public affairs media office at the George Washington University, and that's where I went for grad school. And doing good work there, really interesting work, but had ambitions to do more, to move up in leadership. And with a large university like GW, there is opportunity there, but you do have to kind of be in the right place at the right time. People tend to stay. The jobs that you really want, people tend to keep them for a long time, and you just have to wait your turn, or sometimes fortune will find its way and you'll get those opportunities. But I wasn't all that patient for that, and I had a desire to get back to the Midwest. I love Chicago. I grew up, that was the big. I grew up kind of between Chicago and Detroit, you know, and loved both of those cities. So I had an interest in getting back to the Midwest, closer to where I'm from, and started looking at schools in Chicago for my next, step in my journey. And I was talking to all of them, University of Chicago and DePaul and Northwestern. And then along comes this psychology school that called me back. I reached out to them about an opportunity, and they said, well, we'll fly you to Chicago and you'll get to meet the team here. And honestly, I hadn't heard of the school until, you know, I started that conversation. And I still remember, if you go to Chicago, it's on the Blue Line. It's the Clark and Wells stop, and you get off, and then you walk up the steps on Wells Street. And I remember walking out, and there it was, the Chicago School building, right there on the river. And I said, well, they're obviously doing something right because they have a building on the river, and they have their logo on the side of the building, so something's working. And I remember going to meet a bunch of people, and the last person I met that day was this fellow named Michael Horowitz, who was the president of the Chicago School. And he said something to me that I'll never forget. And he said, we're just talking about where we went to school and things like that. And he says, I went to Northwestern. And Northwestern's this prestigious private Big Ten school. I'm like, wow, it's impressive. He got his, doctoral degree at Northwestern. And then he said, but we're better than Northwestern. The Chicago School is better than Northwestern. And he really believed it. And he's right. For psychology, clinical psychology, there maybe Northwestern would disagree, but I think there was a strong case that what he was doing as the leader of Chicago School was really focused on being great at one thing versus being, trying to do a bunch of different things great. So I was moved by that, and they invited me to serve the mission of the Chicago School, and that's where the journey to TCS started from that opportunity to continuing to work with Michael uh, into what became TCS Education System.
So cool. Wow. That's great. And then eventually, I mean, it's not everyone is trajectory starts off in a system role or you were at the Chicago school in a role there. And then eventually you moved in as president of the colleges of law. How did you find your way making it to COL?
It's 7 years ago this fall, so we're now moving the timeline up to 2015. I was back working for the Chicago school. I was the dean of the Southern California campuses and was doing very fulfilling work, serving TCSPP's mission, but always was compelled by the colleges of law. In fact, I was on the integration team back in 2010 when the colleges of law became affiliated with TCS. We were the third affiliate. There was Chicago School, it was founded, then Pacific Oaks, and then the colleges of law. So was part of that team, out of Chicago, and got to know the school, and really was just compelled by its mission, focusing on access and opportunity, affordability, especially affordability is something I really I take to heart in my work in higher ed. Then just stayed in touch with the school, and then there was this opportunity surfaced in 2015, and I started the conversation that led to formally, putting my name out there for it, and then interviewed with the board, and here I am again. Never would have possibly dreamed, sitting in rural Michigan, that I'd be here in Santa Barbara doing this work. But it's been a wonderful journey and just a great institution.
Well, we're going to knock right into that, right? So I want to have you give us an overview because you speak so eloquently in general, and you also speak so eloquently about the colleges of law and their mission, its students, the alumni, the faculty. Give our audience an overview of your institution, of the colleges of law, why it's so important today, perhaps now more than ever, and any other, things that you'd like to make sure folks can take away about the colleges. And then I want to get into a bit more about the programs in a bit, but maybe a broad overview of COL, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, we were founded in 1969. We had our 50th anniversary a few years ago, and started a oral history project to just get to know the school from its origins, and had the opportunity to talk to people that were even present at the creation, including the first graduate of the school, one of the first graduates, and getting steeped into the history of the school really re-energized me into what the mission is all about. And what I learned through that process is that it was a very noble but audacious project to start this school. It's a short story. Give you the short version of the story. But a number of practicing attorneys, a lot of them from the public defender's office in Santa Barbara County, who saw a need. And if you wanted to study law and do this work, you really had no choice in the local community, at least. You had to go down to LA, or you had to go up north, but you had to leave the area to study law. And if you were interested in doing that, you better be probably 24 years old, willing to do it full time during the day with no job, no family. And that's how law schools in the 1960s, and many of them still today, are set up. So these founders started the Ventura College of Law, and really set it up for working professionals, for people that are interested in the work but maybe are in their 30s or have a family, have a full-time job, and just can't stop everything to do law school. But it was an immediate success and really filled a need in the community. And then here in Santa Barbara, about 5 years later, a like group of local attorneys, I'm still working on the story, still talking to people. I don't know if they saw the success of the Ventura College of Law, said we can do something similar here. Still trying to find that story. But they started what became the Santa Barbara College of Law in 1974. And in fact, just today, I came across an old newspaper article that announced the merger of the two schools. That was in 1978, and they merged and became eventually became the Santa Barbara and Ventura Colleges of Law. And in fact, we just are going through a new identity rebrand as just the Colleges of Law, but under one mission of, as I mentioned, access, opportunity, affordability, and that's still, I mean, that's what the school was founded to be in 1969. That's what we continue to be today. And that kind of mission is what, I got into higher education for, because it really was, for me, I mentioned my journey, it was about opportunity. And I wouldn't be where I'm at today if not for the experience I had having access to education.
That's wonderful. So, in terms of the programs, and especially for the uninitiated, right? What are the programs that a college of law or colleges of law, especially your colleges of law, offer, and what makes them particularly unique in terms of the landscape of legal education out there?
Well, I'll start with the JD and then I'll go to our master's program. The JD really from 1979 until 2018 ran the same way. It was 3 nights a week. It was all on campus in the classroom. A lot our faculty, as they were back then, are still today. Many of them practicing attorneys, judges, commissioners, public defenders, prosecutors who and we just the courthouse is just down the street, so they walk from the courthouse to campus and they teach their class. And for many of our faculty have been doing that because they love it, it's fulfilling, it's a way of giving back, and they've been doing it not just for years but for decades. Faculty go way back. So that was our story for many years. And then when I came along, and largely informed by my work with TCS, there was this great opportunity to innovate the curriculum. And I know the Board of Trustees had a desire to move in new directions and to really further harness the opportunities that TCS brings to the college's law, the opportunities of having access to systems and people that can bring new approaches to our work. And we started a project to do a hybrid JD and brought in an extraordinary dean, Dr. Jackie Gardina, as our dean and chief academic officer, who, like me, was really looking to do something new in higher education, looking for a clearing to bring new ideas and innovation into our work. And she brought others into the project, and for 2 years, we developed what became the hybrid JD program. That's 70% of the curriculum is offered online. The rest of it is offered through a residency experience, similar to what Saybrook, a number of your programs, is set up to be. And we had modest expectations, and we launched it in the fall of 2018. So we can get 15 students to do this. I think it's something to get started with. It's a foundation. We more than doubled that, and really there was just an opening in the marketplace for this program, untapped market. A lot of students left behind that definitely couldn't do the day program at a traditional JD student, and even with us couldn't do the weeknight program. And it was a big success. So that's still a success for us. We almost have as many students in that program as we have with the combined with the other campuses. And then this year, the same team that brought us the hybrid JD, Dr. Gardina and members of the faculty, wanted to develop something new and exciting on the master's side. So we created the Masters of Arts in Law, and really focusing on opportunity for people that may or may not want to practice law, but work in the legal services sector, and having access to education focused on just great innovation that's happening in legal services, and being able to understand where technology is playing a more and greater role in the more automation with the work of legal practice. So it was really organized around developing those competencies in graduates, and not just graduates, but graduates of a JD program. And that's something that we've opened up the curriculum to our graduates, and actually have a number of them. They're colleges of law graduates who are taking one of the courses in that curriculum this fall through continuing education. So we see more opportunities with that as well.
What I love about it, it's very compact, it's very focused. You know what you offer. You've got a mission that's very compelling, and you're doing great work within the community and attracting community members from that area of Santa Barbara and Ventura. It's pretty powerful. You know, I was talking about this actually. Your counterpart, Dr. Gardina, and I had an interview just a couple weeks ago where we talked about legal education. We're not going to spend all of our time here today talking about that, but one thing I really pressed her on, and I'd like to hear more from you as well as the president of the college. Yeah, there's a wealth of law schools, Dr. Nehmer. I mean, a lot. Not to mention, there's this what seems to be a bias towards ABA or the American Bar Association accreditation. You're sitting in a space where you're Cal Bar accredited, not ABA accredited. Not calling it a weakness, I'm just calling that out. You're in a very competitive marketplace. You are being successful. The Colleges of Law is a successful institution. What do you see as the future going forward of the colleges, and how are you going to continue to breed success year in and year out? And I know you can and will, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are around that, especially where legal education is concerned.
Well, I feel that we're well positioned for what lies ahead in not just legal education, but higher education. Number one, we are not doing this alone. I think for schools our side and where we live in the sector, those that either really they're not connected to a larger institution, there might be independent law schools or just independent colleges and universities, especially those with enrollment fewer than 1,000 students. They're really subject to the whims of the marketplace. As higher education goes, they go with it. So they may not have major reserves. So if there's a downward trajectory in enrollment, they're really positioned to struggle. So when we affiliated with TCS in 2010, I think that set us up for where higher education is going on. When you see this all over the higher education publications, and I have to say, we kind of called it. We could see it. We could see in every sector will eventually have a reckoning where what worked in the past is going to have to evolve. And you saw consolidation, and I grew up in the automotive industry. Certainly saw it in airlines. Name a sector, name a business that hasn't gone through transformative change in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Legal ed and higher ed at large was just it was inevitable. It's going through it now. And so we're positioned, I think, well for the future through TCS, our affiliation. And then the investments we made in the people and the infrastructure and the systems to be able to deliver not just hybrid programming, but to be able to do it well and to be able to do it is not just a follower, but a leader. I love this, right? There's only one first. There's only one flag that says you're the first accredited law school in California to have a hybrid. That's us. We're the first. We own that position in the marketplace. And that's something I think we got a head start. There's a lot of others out, and you mentioned competition. Absolutely. A lot of schools, ABA, Cal Bar, that are moving, and they may be informed by our success, are moving into the hybrid space and seeing that their student population want more than just one option to engage in their programming. So between our work with TCS, even our work with Saybrook, you and me, we have some, I think, very exciting opportunities and projects that we're working on together, and just the muscles we've built over the last 4 years, 5 years, and changing the way we deliver our curriculum. I think we were well positioned for COVID. When COVID hit in March of 2020, we definitely had to scramble to get the on-site program into a remote modality, but we took a week off when we were back and running the following Monday. And because of the systems that I've mentioned and our work with TCS, and we were able to get it back up and running and do the best we could. And actually had a very good year in 2020 with retention and incoming students. So I feel confident in where we're going next as an institution. I mentioned the Masters of Arts in Law. That opens us up for new opportunities in legal education, the lifelong learning initiative that we have, continuing education to just continue to add more value for our students and graduates. I feel that's where not just legal education is going, but all of higher education. It is all going to be about providing more and more value because it made a lot of news this summer with Biden with the cancellation of student debt. And that raised this issue of the cost of higher education. I think schools are just going to need, colleges, universities need to think about how they're going to contain costs and provide more value for students.
It's the Gordian knot, though, of higher education, right? You know, the desire for more, you know, more services, more quality, and keep it cheap, keep it on the low in terms of cost. We can get into that a little bit today. I really appreciate you. You've pretty much answered all my core questions I was going to ask you about where things are at with colleges of law and higher ed. I want to dig in a little bit deeper on this, though, right? So we are experiencing seismic shifts in our sector, in the higher education sector, and it's not the case everywhere around the globe. My daughter's pursuing her degree in the UK. They find our market based approach to higher education, I think, probably broadly a little appalling or concerning at best. And yet, I think, as you rightly note, this is a system. I don't think you implied this. We're in the system we have, and this is where we're at, and we've got to adjust and adapt accordingly. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of root causes of how we got here today? Any thoughts that you might have? I know you're a student of history, and I always appreciate your insights on that. And how do you perceive the changes? I mean, maybe from the inside baseball perspective.
Well, the sector is a large, kind of complicated, or just thinking about higher education here domestically, and we're different branches of it. So there's the undergraduate, and then there's the traditional undergraduate, and there is a pecking order within that space. What we're not seeing is like the call them the elite, the the hundred or so, top tier institutions. They're doing fine. They may be having to be more selective with some of the projects that they do. Have to be more focused on what their core mission is and double down on that. There is a middle ground. I mentioned Western Michigan, a school that I went to Western and very proud of it. It was a great experience for me. But it's schools like Western that I do think are seeing some pressure on enrollment, and state institutions as well. University of Michigan not seeing pressure, but Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan, Central Michigan, those kind of schools, I think there's just not as many. It's just demographics, right? Undergraduate age students coming through. There definitely isn't seeing the kind of growth that you saw in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, early 2000s, with just demographically with young people looking for college. And people knew this in the sector. I've been to many conferences, and you have as well. Like there's this sort of like demographic wall coming. It's going to hit in the mid 2020s, and it kind of is. It wasn't. You didn't have to be a sophisticated data scientist to sort of see where it was going, and you needed to be prepared for it. And well, how do you do that? You have to diversify your portfolio. You have to move into online. You have to really get a sense of what your brand and place in the marketplace is, and being able to change the way you're doing. And the word business often ruffles a lot of people, and change the way you're doing business, and really focusing on, as I mentioned, doubling down on what your core mission is, and what you're here, why you were created, and that's something that I think we're doing well here at the College of Law. We were created in 1969 to serve a a population that wasn't being served. There was opportunity in the marketplace, and we were created to meet that opportunity and execute on that strategy. And that's just something we continue to do. And colleges, universities that don't know who they are, or are stuck in the past, or maybe trying to get back to what they used to be, or not quite sure where they're going next. Um, I'm not saying this universally, but a lot of them I think are just, there's not a lot of time for you to pivot, especially if it's a big institution. There's going to be some challenges ahead as demographics shift. And then the larger question of the value proposition of higher ed. Again, you can't open a Chronicle or another publication, or even the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, one of the major publications that gets into or an op-ed or a story that really questions the value of higher ed, the costs and the amount of debt that students are taking on to have access to higher education, and what the return on that is. It's a huge issue. I mean, you look at generationally, my parents didn't go to college, but were able to have access to a middle class opportunity because my dad worked at a factory and had a pension. We know, and you grew up in Ohio, and you know that that's gone. And you could buy a house for $22,000 and have it paid off in 20 years, let alone 30 years. So
A car for 3, a house for 22, right? And you could educate your kids at a local college for maybe 2 grand. So you're not even at 30 for like the major life expenses. And yes, those are those dollars in those days. However, to your point, you could make that work as a family.
and have a lake house,
Yeah.
place up north. It was like, we got a place up north, and it might have been a camper, but it was a place up north.
Hey, it was the dream for all of us there. Well, it's interesting too. You raised the value proposition. I know probably our faculty at Saybrook get tired of me saying it or talking about it, but it is true. And I was just listening to a podcast today while I was eating lunch, and it was a political roundtable of younger folks, right? So people not in their 40s, who are in their 20s, right? Who were pretty upset actually about the Biden administration's decision, not uniformly, but around the loan forgiveness program. And one of the women on the panel was making the case that colleges have broadly failed to make the case that it's important. And that saddens me, of course, right? Because I think we're trying every day, but there may be something. I mean, again, she's an N of one, right? It's one individual saying that. But yet, I think to your point, we continue to hear echoes of that in the conversation nationally. How do we get our message sharper in higher education about our value proposition to, counter and embrace those, bring folks like her into the broader tent to value the higher education sector in a more meaningful and more connected fashion? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I keep going back to this. I can't stress it enough. Just knowing who you are and why you exist and what your mission is, and just what your core objective is. And one thing that Saybrook and colleges of law and other schools at TCS have in common, it is we are focused on students, and we're organized around students and their success, and taking that very seriously. That's what we do every day. And this might feel like a call out for other institutions. I'll put it out there and take it from there but if you're kind of conflicted between, do you have a research agenda as an institution or a student agenda? Well, it's both. Okay, but there has to be kind of a line of what the focus is going to be. And one of the factors that, now just put it out there, it could be provocative, but one of the drivers of cost is people. It's not hard. Just look at the budget. A lot of these budgets are public in the public sector. Just the people costs is the leading driver of the cost of higher education. And is it an efficient labor model? I think it's the right question. Is it? If you're subsidizing research projects, that do they give back to the student success charge through student tuition dollars? I think it's a legitimate question to raise, and that's something we don't face as much as maybe more traditional schools that will have a research agenda. Our faculty, as I mentioned, we have full-time faculty, we have professional faculty, but largely they're those that serve day to day in the local legal community and come back to teach as a way to give back. And the professionals are we can do the assessment and training and opportunities for development for faculty to do better with that. But we're affordable, Nathan, because largely our labor model is designed to be able to be affordable. And this is something that is challenging across the sector. And again, it gets back to what your mission is, what you're here for, and how you fund your operations.
Couldn't agree more on most of what you just said. I think in our conversations at Saybrook has a lot to do with if you're going to expend the money on the labor, then the quality, the outcomes should be best in class, in my view, right? If you're going to spend the money on full time faculty, full time staff, which we're happy to do, and we do, that experience from students learning, researching, co facilitating experiences, co teaching, teaching assistantships, et cetera, you name it, really need to be full, rich and rewarding. And we're always seeking ways to do that. But I agree with you 100%. You have to know who you are, and you have to keep striving to do well and do better. And that's always a kind of the watch phrase, I think, for us, or watch phrases here in higher ed. So, I unfortunately, Matt, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I would love to spend like another hour and a half, like kibitzing about all of this. Really, what maybe close out your discussion on higher ed? What's the biggest joy in your role as a president? What are some success stories, maybe one or two that you can point to that really make you say, "I'm so glad I do this for a living"?
One of my favorite parts of higher education is the renewal piece of it. What's that mean? Well, we just had our orientation this past weekend for our cohort number 5 for our hybrid JD program. And as our first in-person cohort, I mean, orientation in 3 years, because we ran them online the last 2 years. But just to be back in the classroom, Nathan, to be back in that with that energy and that enthusiasm. And I said this in my welcome. I mean, for every one of you in this room doing and spending your Saturday, and it was a nice day out. There's so many people that aren't taking this step forward to advance their professional life, to advance their education. And there's nothing wrong with them. They're just doing other things. But you guys, you're all here and you're doing the work, and just that's what keeps me. Many things, but one of the biggest things that what keeps me coming back is seeing the enthusiasm and the spirit of these students as they come into their program, and then watching them carry through. And then my second favorite day of the year is commencement. I'm sure it's up there for you as well, of watching the that cycle complete when they walk across. It's sort of like you're there for the starting line, you're there for the finish line, but every finish line is a new starting line. So they're on to the next thing in their life. And to be able to sort of witness that cycle, I've been at it for 24 years. It never gets old for me. It keeps me coming back. And
We get a little misty, don't
we
we?
get a little misty. That's why we do it.
Music cues up, and then you see it, and it's like every time. and I'm prepared for it. Yeah, I get you. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. We have 2 quick take questions that we do with every guest, and so you are no different. And so these are really off the top of your head questions that we would like for you to answer. So the first one is, what does the term or word humanistic mean to you, Dr. Nehmer?
You got, how much time do I got? Just 10 seconds?
Yeah, 10, 15 seconds.
Humanistic it's to me, it means this concept of internal locus of control. It's about volition. It's about the individual human having the opportunity to make a change in their lives and the lives of others.
Yeah, and you nailed it, and you're not even, well, you are kind of a psychologist, right? You have a PhD in org psych, so yeah.
Yeah, I got the PhD in org psych. So.
All right, so yeah. You passed with flying colors there. And the last question, what are 3 things individuals can do right now to make their world a better place?
Get in communication, get into action, and as I just said, be present that you can make a difference. That if you don't like whatever change, if you want, it's the classic Gandhi line, be the change you want to see in the world. And get in communication with others, enroll people in that vision for change in your life, and you'll step back and see extraordinary things happen.
Dr. Matthew Nehmer, president of the Colleges of Law in Santa Barbara and Ventura, also dear colleague and friend at the TCS Education System. We are so glad to have you here today on Saybrook Insights. We're going to do more of these in the future. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been a real great ride.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to continued conversations.
Okay, that was like the fastest 45 minutes yet. I could have spent a long time. I think I say that after every episode, right? I think I say that as well after every episode. Matt was fabulous, and I hope you enjoyed President Nehmer as much as I did. Remember his 3 major takeaways. Get in communication, get in action, and be present so that you can make a difference. Be the change that you want to see in the world. It's going to be really critical, especially in these times. If you want to see those fabulous video segments that are created, our wonderful producer, Phil, has created those, and they're available on our Saybrook University YouTube page. Please visit and subscribe. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to Apple iTunes and leave that 5-star rating and review. Subscribe so you can get episodes as they come out. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating and make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google, Stitcher, Pandora, and others. Remember to check out our show notes for information on today's guests, including links to websites, books, etc. For more about the university here at Saybrook, go to www.saybrook.edu. Click on any area of study at the top that intrigues you, locate it, and click on it to learn more, or simply Google Saybrook University. All right, that's all today, folks. Really thank you for your time, your attention, for your engagement. We're so pleased to have you as an audience member here at Saybrook Insights. Take care and be well.